Okay, good morning, everyone. Just wanted to say thank you for joining us. And I wanted to thank the minister. You should only see me, unfortunately, with video, but the minister will be attending, is attending through audio. We just had some problems with government devices and video coming through. But I wanted to first say thank you very much for your call when you were first appointed almost 5 months ago. It was wonderful to hear of your appreciation for the efforts of my fellow volunteers at the Canadian Bar Association. And listen, it cannot be easy for you to be having to get up to speed on all of immigration's programs and policies, and now having with the virus to participate in all these cabinet decisions relating to the virus generally, but also with respect to foreign nationals and entering Canada. You've made some wonderful decisions with respect to students being able to study online for over half the time and still be eligible for the coveted postgraduate work permit. There's been some very great decisions with respect to the new process for email landing, so becoming an official permanent residence by email and not having to go into a local office. Those have been some wonderful programs. And honestly, I have to say that your department has been absolutely focused. They have, just as you reached out for this event, and I thank you for that, your department has been amazing at reaching out proactively and scheduling meetings. We had weekly meetings at the outset, and they've been working around the clock to deal with this virus issues, and they've been very receptive to our feedback. So we do have over 500 people registered, and so I did wanted to thank you again. Of course, Mr. Mendicino was first elected as a member for Eglinton Lawrence in 2015. He's been our minister since November 20th, 2019. There's a connection with he's worked at the Law Society of Ontario. He was an adjunct professor at Osgoode Hall Law School. So those are some highlights I noticed on your resume. Of course, you're a federal prosecutor for over 10 years, helping fight organized crime and bring terrorists, including the Toronto 18, to justice. So I would invite you to make a few remarks, and then we can proceed with the question and answer.
Well, thank you very much, Ravi, for that kind, gracious, and brief introduction. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, everything.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is just yet another reminder about how we are all adapting to our present circumstances, which have been quite unprecedented. And I just want to assure you and all of the viewers who are tuning into this webinar that were you able to see me, there would be the proverbial bookcase in the background with a closed door and not much else to see. So I do apologize for not being able to connect visually, but I am very happy to be with you and with all of your members at the CBA today for this important discussion around immigration, COVID-19, and more broadly, what Canada is doing to respond together during these very, very unprecedented times. Let me begin by expanding a few words of gratitude and thanks to the CBA for your advocacy, not only in the immigration sector, but really right across the country. As a former practicing lawyer, I do know how important it is to have a robust bar, one that contributes from policy perspectives, as well as from legal principles that are enshrined in our charter. And I really want to take a moment to express my personal appreciation for the work that you do day in and day out. And I also want to say thank you, Ravi, to you and the CBA for your very generous offer in the aftermath of Flight 752 for offering pro bono services to the families of the victims that lost loved ones. And that is exactly the kind of sentiment of looking after one another that helped us get over that difficult moment. And it really, little did we know, spark off a very challenging year, as you put it. I just want to take a few other moments to highlight where we are at and where we are going in terms of our response to COVID-19. Over the last number of days, and I would say a week and a half or so, we have started to see some progress in bending the curve in a downwards trend. And I think that that is a result of many of the public healthcare controls that we put into place around physical distancing and social distancing. And so here I commend you and everyone else who is lending an effort to that. There is progress. We are not yet able to take our eye off of the prize, which is to get new cases down to zero. But we are trending in that direction, and that is positive. And that's why you are starting to see some signs about reopening the economy, albeit in a very staged and responsible manner. In addition to that, the government has put a lot of emphasis in introducing emergency relief to individuals who've lost their jobs because of COVID, to families, to businesses, small and large, and more recently to students. And I'm going to come to that piece in the context of the International Students Program later in our talk. And so the sum total of all of these efforts has really been to allow people to keep their heads above the water, to bridge them over this very difficult period, and to position Canada as a whole successfully for an economic recovery. And a lot of those programs have been the subject of and improved by your feedback and feedback that we are getting from stakeholders right across the country. And in the context of immigration, refugees, and citizenship, I just want to say a very monumental thank you to our public servants for the rapidity with which they are adapting to the situation and delivering for Canadians. We have had to adapt ourselves in our priorities by initially helping with the repatriation effort and trying to get as many Canadians and permanent residents back home as quickly as we could. And there have been just really unprecedented efforts in that effort. And in addition to that, on a day in, day out basis, we are putting a lot of emphasis on the temporary foreign worker and the seasonal agricultural worker program to ensure that we safeguard our food supply chain. And so that is all just one of or a series of things that we are doing together to ensure that we are overcoming and getting onto the other side of the curve, positioning ourselves for economic recovery, and of course, leveraging immigration, which is has long been part of Canada's success, and I'm convinced, as I know you are, will be key to our economic recovery in the future. And so, je suis très heureux d'être avec vous ici. Je suis tellement intéressant de votre commentaire et votre question. Je suis prêt pour répondre à tous, and I'm very excited to have the discussion. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Merci bien. Okay, well, thank you for that. That's a great intro, and I think the overview on COVID generally and where we're heading, you know, and what we're doing as the government's doing is very helpful for people to have generally. So let's start with, I think the biggest question that was mine is, of course, the levels plan. Of course, I want to thank you for recognizing the importance of immigration. We have seen some nativist in our neighbors to the south, and we appreciate that very much, that your department is continuing to process permanent and temporary residence applications. You know, that keeps your officials busy, and it keeps us as a bar busy, and it helps us to, you know, address the concerns of various clients, as you can imagine. So we do hear immigration skeptics, though, saying that with so many people unemployed, we should be cutting. Now, I said that when the Conservatives were in power, they ramped up levels during the last recession and immediately after the recession. And the reality is that COVID-19 hasn't changed the demographic reality of Canada. We still have an aging population, although we still rely on immigrants for our population growth, labor force growth, and economic growth. So is immigration the solution to help refuel and to help our economy recover, given that immigrants come often very young, do jobs, and they connect Canada to the world? Or should we expect a change in direction in terms of levels?
On the contrary, I think, as you said, immigration will absolutely be key to our success in our economic recovery going forward, precisely because we do not anticipate that COVID-19 will substantially change the long-term demographic trends, which I have spoken about and my predecessors have spoken about under this government. And what are those trends? Well, we know that there are more people retiring faster and more quickly. We know as a result that the ratio of those that are in the workforce to retirees is shrinking, and it's shrinking rapidly. Those are long-term trends which will not change fundamentally enough in order for us to stop immigrating. And so, on the contrary, we do continue to rely on immigration going forward. It will be an economic driver, and this will be the North Star of our policy going forward. At the same time, I must take a moment to say that COVID-19 has had an impact on our ability to do business as usual, as it has right across the economy. So this is an opportunity, though, for us to seize the moment and to innovate and to evolve and to leverage technology. And I want to commend my department for standing up new processes, looking for alternative ways to land people, to do work in the humanitarian sector, notwithstanding the fact that our folks are not in their offices. And so through these new innovations, we are continuing to make progress this year. And I think as we continue to make our way towards the fall, we will have more to say about our levels. But the fundamental objective here, which is to grow our country through immigration, will remain intact and the same. And that is as much about the economy as it is a definitional issue for Canada. And what you have seen when you look back and you draw from the lessons of history is that this is not the first time that Canada has faced a pandemic. And even in those years when we have faced pandemics, or we have faced economic challenges, the likes of a global depression in the 30s, or even in the war, that we have always continued to grow. And even though there have been peaks and valleys throughout those various eras within our history, what you see over time is a long-standing trend towards immigration. And that's part of the value of Canada, that we look abroad and we see the best and the brightest. We see those who are talented, and we say to them, yes, you are welcome to come to Canada. You are welcome to come, add, contribute, and in a way that enhances who we are as a country. And those lessons will endure, and those lessons will inform our work, not only in government, but in the private sector and in the charitable sector, and in many, many different ways. And so I'm quite excited about the future, notwithstanding that this has been a challenging period. And I look forward to having additional conversations with you, because I know the CBSA has some very good ideas to contribute when it comes to how we immigrate going forward.
Sounds good. And CBA too. You said CBSA, but I know you meant CBA.
Sorry, I meant CBA. I beg your pardon.
Both. Why not both? Why not both? Why not both? Okay, so I guess the next question. You mentioned your department officials a few times, and I totally agree with you in terms of how wonderful they've been, working around the clock and reaching out in a way, as I said, that they, that has been absolutely phenomenal. But what has been the impact of COVID-19 on the department in terms of the operations, both here and abroad?
Well, the most obvious impact is that our staff are not able to work from their usual office space. And because of the way that our processes have been set up conventionally, that does pose some immediate challenges around how it is that we process applications, how we move individuals who are coming in as permanent residents through the various stages until they are fully landed here. But what we have done is we have looked at ways to mitigate those challenges by setting up remotely. And here that involves ensuring that our people have access to the technologies that are required, whether it's through access to work laptops or access to digital broadband, ensuring that we are able to upload those devices with all of the tools that they would otherwise have access to in the office space. I think we're also looking at our policies and seeing whether or not there are ways in which we can adapt them to create the flexibility given the exigencies of the circumstances that we now find ourselves in. And so together, when we put all of this together, what we're seeing is a real capacity to innovate, to evolve the way in which we are doing our business. And in some areas, we're actually making improvements. So for instance, when it comes to the temporary foreign worker class and the seasonal agricultural workers that we need very quickly, we have managed to speed up our processing of those visas so that those folks are able to get into Canada safely and securely as quickly as possible, because we're right at the beginning of planting season. I know I'll have more to say about that in the agri part of our discussion, but really there has been a lot of evolution around our processes, and I think that will not only serve us during COVID-19 very well, but in fact it will inspire new ways for us to do business in the long run.
Okay, and we'll come to the agricultural workers. That's the question I want to ask you about. Another one that's always on people's minds, and I say in every federal election, this is always the big issue that comes up, which is parents and grandparents. And it's an issue that we get inquiries about constantly. So, I wouldn't fall off my chair if you told me that there may be some delay with respect to this program, and of course, there's already been an announced delay. But can you tell me, what are your thoughts on reopening it? Are we really waiting until a vaccine for this one? Like, what should we be telling people?
Well, first, I don't want you to fall off your chair at all, and you look firmly ensconced and very comfortable. So let's hope you're still in that position at the end of this discussion. But when it comes to the parent and grandparent program, and more broadly, the work that our government has done to reunite families, because bear in mind that the PGP is really just one way in which we are doing that. There's no government that has done more. There has no government in the context of immigration that has reunited more families than ours. And I'm very proud of that work. And I am proud of the work that we have done and will continue to do under the parent and grandparent program. At the same time, as I think you allude to in your question, we are concerned that parents and grandparents are among those who are at greatest risk for COVID-19. So this is just part of the broader context that we have had to bear in mind as we are constantly reassessing the way in which we are putting these programs to the ground and implementing them. I will say that, though, it is important on the issue of family reunification, before I come specifically to your question about PGP, that those individuals who are here and want to sponsor a spouse or a child who have lost their job because of COVID-19 and need to claim the Canada Emergency Response Benefit will not be penalized anyway from doing so when it comes to the income qualifications. And I think that was a really important assurance. And again, one of the vital pieces of feedback that we got from the CBA and from others in this sector. So if you have to claim CERB and you are trying to sponsor somebody to reunite your family, there will be no disqualification as a result. You will not be ineligible because of that. And that's really key.
It's not social assistance, essentially.
That's right. It will not be deemed social assistance for the purpose of your application in sponsorship. When it comes to the PGP, look, I am really, what resonates with me is that parents and grandparents who want to come and be here with their family, but who are unable to do so as quickly as they otherwise would have been were it not for COVID-19 are concerned about that. And I think it's important that we extend some compassion to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And this is really a program that is born not out of only a compassionate desire to reunite families, but because there are some benefits that are brought to the household through the program. What I hope to do is to be able to have an update about when we intend to relaunch. And yes, it's true that COVID-19 has been a disruptive force in those intentions, but I feel as though we will remain committed to family reunification vis-a-vis the parents and grandparents program in the long run. And I'll have more to say about that in the not too distant future.
Very good. Okay, well, let's go back. You mentioned the agricultural program, so let's talk about that. Of course, there have been some big shortages reported. Canadians are obviously understandably concerned about safeguarding our food supply. We heard of cases where people were hoarding at the grocery stores and that kind of stuff. People were worried. So what has your department done with respect to, speeding up the process of foreign workers that are so critical? Because, frankly, my understanding from talking to different people in the sector is that, while it would be great if some of the unemployed Canadians could do it, some of this stuff is technical. And so what's your department doing to speed up the processing of foreign nationals coming in?
Well, I'm going to come to that in a moment, but first, let me just say that hoarding doesn't help anyone, and I know that's not you, and certainly not the members that are on the line today. But that knee-jerk reaction is born out of fear, and I think one way in which we can address that is by educating the broader public about the steps that we are taking to safeguard food security. And the Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Department is playing a critical role on that front. And how are we doing that? Well, through the administration of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. In the earliest days after the outbreak and the anticipated surge in Canada, we made sure to ensconce, as part of the overall travel restrictions regime, an exemption for this class of workers. And we have prioritized the administration of seasonal agricultural workers who are coming into Canada by, as I say, putting the resources that are necessary, standing up special teams to process and turn around those applications as quickly as possible. We are working very closely with our provincial partners, and let me just give a nod to my provincial counterparts in particular, who have been wonderful to work with on this file. Everybody understands that we need to collaborate as much as possible when it comes to the administration of the TFW program, because it really does involve overlapping jurisdictions. I also want to say that we have stayed close in touch with the agricultural sector and seafood sector employers who have a vested interest in seeing this program continue. And we've provided some additional financial relief to them so that they can accommodate the physical spacing and distancing that is required when it comes to lodging. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the advocacy of my colleagues, Ministers Bibeau and Qualtrough and Jordan, with whom I share the responsibility for making this file work. Is there more that we can do? Absolutely, and we are always looking at ways to create some additional flexibility around work permits, around really removing any barriers that might exist abroad. And that's just one thing that I want to highlight, that there are things that are within our control that we can try to mitigate, and then there are things that are beyond our control. And often one of the greatest challenges at getting temporary foreign workers into Canada are the set of circumstances that are within the purview and the remit of countries, the source countries from which they're coming. So we do engage with our counterparts abroad. We are making progress. The other thing that is really beyond our control are the market demands. And certainly in some sectors of the agricultural and seafood sectors, we will see for at least some period of time a reduced demand for certain types of foods and products. So that too has to be taken into the mix. But I just want to assure you that on the whole, we have made tremendous progress, in particular in April, which is a key month in the agricultural calendar, when we need to get those workers here. And of course, once they do get here, they do have to subject themselves to the 14-day mandatory isolation period, and then they can get out into work. And while there have been some outbreaks recently, which I'm concerned about and members of our government are very concerned about, we are working closely with the provinces to contain those outbreaks and make sure that our regulations are really working the way they are intended to, so around inspections, around compliance, so that we can safeguard the health and safety of those workers, Canadians, and overall our food supply chain.
And overall, I mean, I think it's been, yes, I know the outbreak you're talking about, but it's been fairly impressive in terms of charging planes. And, we need to think about 60,000 agricultural workers, and we've had very close to that number coming in. So I think that's been very good in terms of being able to safeguard the food supply. So now let me turn to something that's a bit more legalistic. Normally, we talked about CBSA before. Normally, the Canada Border Services Agency relies on immigration guidance because normally the Canada Border Services agency is interpreting the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And so it makes sense to rely on the Immigration Department for guidance with respect to that. But now we have the CBSA, which is interpreting orders in council pursuant to the Quarantine Act. So we now have CBSA interpreting things that aren't immigration laws per se. IRCC, the Immigration Department, is continuing to publish guidance with respect to what is optional, what's discretionary. So I guess the question is, and in my mind, I think that there's a role for CBSA to have guidance because they need to have guidance with respect to people showing up at the border. And there's a role for guidance from the Immigration Department because, of course, that may relate to visa offices abroad, et cetera. But what is your expectation around CBSA following the guidance the department is continuing to publish? Because the guidance from the Immigration Department very much reflects the letter of the law with respect to the Order in Council, which is about reuniting families, foreign nationals being able to come. So do you expect CBSA to follow IRCC guidance, or do you accept that they should be able to follow their own guidance?
Well, first I want to extend my appreciation to our frontline CBSA workers, because they have the unenviable task of having to apply this totally new travel restrictions regime, which was created in a very short period of time without the benefit of having the usual luxury of reflection and implementation. And so there has to be some space in our overall assessment of how this is all working on the ground level for the very difficult and exigent circumstances in which we are now operating in this COVID era. And of course, we do work closely with CBSA to ensure that they understand how the law was designed, in particular around the orders in council that are governing the back and forth over our international borders. And we have tried to take a very sensible approach to this, which is to say we've created some exemptions for immediate family members, family reunification, international students, temporary workers, those who are visa holders who are seeking to become permanent residents, and other officials who need to come into the country for national security reasons or public interest reasons, like related to public health care and responding to COVID-19. So there is a lot in this mix, is my point. And we do recognize that there are sometimes issues that come up at the border. By the way, those challenges existed before COVID-19, and I think we can all acknowledge that they will probably exist after we're the other side of this curve. So how we are working through these issues is both at the policy level as well as on a day-to-day basis by troubleshooting those problems when they're brought to my office's attention or they're brought to the attention of my colleague, Minister Blair. We do try to, again, exercise some good judgment when the discretion is exercised at the border. And we know that sometimes, that creates an impediment for those who are trying to reunite their family. But the principle that guides all of this, and the message that we have tried to send to everybody who is wanting to come to Canada or who is Canadian and wants to travel abroad, is if you don't need to travel, then don't. If it's essential, if it's related to your work, if there are really, really urgent circumstances that require you to go abroad and come back, then do so. And when that principle seems a bit weak at the border, we also expect that our CBSA officials will exercise the judgment in the circumstances, which may mean turning them back. That's not because they're trying to be difficult. It's because they are trying to uphold the most important priority in this present context, which is to protect the health and safety of Canadians.
And it has, absolutely, it's been very difficult for, again, people are working from home and policies have to be developed. And it's been a whirlwind for us as the private bar, but I'm sure it's been quite difficult on officials to create policies and to respond on a sort of evolving basis to the crisis. So we do appreciate that these are not normal times to develop. One thing that we've suggested is that, there is sort of give us as many examples as possible, so that then we can communicate to our clients and tell them, this is maybe not the right time to come. But that's something that I can tell you I'm working very closely with Minister Blair's office as well, and trying to get the two departments to speak in one voice as much as possible. And I think that again, the departmental officials have been phenomenal in terms of receptive to our comments and our
For sure.
And sometimes criticism about trying to be, just having more examples so people will know types of scenarios better. But on that note, I mean, there's, let's talk about work permits. So, the Deputy Prime Minister said that foreign nationals foreign workers may enter Canada. And, that sort of made sense to us because there was obviously a twin concern. One is, of course, the health and safety of Canadians. The other is our economy. And so it did make sense to us that, the Canadian government wanted to keep foreign workers entering Canada to help with our economy and sustaining it. Then there were a few carve-outs which made sense to me, like, for instance, the working holiday program, which is, to me, akin more towards, tourism, in the sense that you're coming here, you may be getting a job in a bar or whatever, and having some life experience. So the idea that program would people wouldn't be welcome so much in that program made sense to me. The idea that if you had a work permit, but frankly your job wasn't available anymore, well, that's a sensible carve out, because it doesn't make sense to have you fly to Canada for a job that no longer exists. So that made sense. But I guess in the bar, where a lot of concerns were raised around, is there what I call a test upon a test? So in other words, there's basic work permit criteria. There's all kinds of work permit work programs relating to work permits. But is there a test relating to things like, again, critical infrastructure, food supply, coming to fight COVID-19 with respect to research or as a doctor? If you're not in one of those three areas, are you still welcome to come to Canada? Are we still open for business? Are we still allowing workers to come in, or is there a test sitting upon the test? I guess that's something I was hoping you might be able to comment on.
Happy to answer that. And just before we move on, I will take a moment to say I do appreciate that you're working closely with my office and others who are attending this webinar today when it comes to working through some of those individual cases at the border which are problematic. And I just want to underline, we are trying to be compassionate and trying to be responsive to those cases because they are difficult, and we do work through them wherever we possibly can in conjunction with the CBSA. And when it comes to the temporary foreign worker program, the way the OIC is drafted is it does create an exemption for all who hold a valid temporary foreign work visa. We took this approach because we thought that it made sense to honor and respect the principle that if you are coming to Canada to work, to contribute to the economy, that on the whole, this will be a positive impact to all of us together. And that is true throughout COVID right now. Now, it is true in the processing of these visas that we are putting some priority to the essential services sector, as you would expect us to. So what are some examples of those essential services? Food, as we've mentioned, healthcare, and other critical infrastructure areas which are playing a vital role in our response to COVID-19. At the same time, there are many who are still coming to Canada who have valid job offers, who are ready to put their shoulder to the wheel, which is a good thing. We will honor those visas and we will continue to process them, again, showing good judgment and discretion when it comes to the way in which we are prioritizing that work. As you point out, there are some programs that we have suspended because they are not as essential. We will revisit periodically whether or not we need to keep those programs in advance, or whether or not we're in a better position to reactivate them. But on the whole, the clear and simplified approach that we have taken to respecting temporary foreign work through the honoring of the valid visas that are in hand has been, I think, a net positive to our overall response to COVID-19.
Fair enough. I mean, the other part besides work permits that we hear a lot about in the press, and that we hear a lot about from, our fellow lawyers, relate to family reunification. So I guess the question is around, are all foreign nationals able to join their Canadian family here full stop? Or are there some exceptions? We've heard stories of a father wanting to witness the birth of his, Canadian spouse's, their child. And we've had challenges there. We've had, some families showing up. Frankly, some of them really haven't had a connection to Canada for many years. Some may just be seeking to enter. One may be Canadian, the other not, seeking to enter Canada to ride COVID-19 out in Canada, which to me may raise a question on whether that's appropriate or not. I think that could be a legitimate reason to say, listen, if you don't ordinarily reside here, then maybe it's not the time to come here. And just if the only reason to come here is just to ride it out if you're ordinarily resident. So there may be some reasonable demarcations to make, but I think, but I guess I'd ask generally, what's your take on the general principle? Should all foreign nationals be able to rejoin their family in Canada full stop, or are there reasonable exceptions? And again, I think that we hope to see some examples being populated, particularly by CBSA, so that we can then advise our clients better. But that's not your department. But what's your thought generally on that?
Well, it's a good question, and my take is that, as I've mentioned before, that it's the CBSA officials on the ground who have the individual autonomy to make those judgment calls as they come up to the border. But I want to really underline that this is a tough time for families, especially if your close relative is not a citizen and is trying to come to see you and support you. And so being apart and being divided during COVID-19 is not an easy thing. And I do think that, I want to convey to everybody on the line that I understand that. And I know that it's frustrating. And I think we have to try to balance the desire to be compassionate in those circumstances with having good, sensible policies in place to stop the spread of COVID-19. And I think what I would say to you is that this is one of those areas where the CBA and your members can really be helpful by giving us the feedback in those individual cases at the border, trying to discern whether or not there are some patterns in how there are unintended consequences that are flowing. And that way, maybe we can improve and provide greater clarity going forward. And I work very closely with Minister Blair on this, and our two teams and our departments are really locked at the hip in trying to make this travel restrictions regime work with all of the appropriate exemptions. And as I say, we look forward to you and to other advocates in this area to make sure that we're getting the proper operational guidance so that we can really reduce the extent to which there are these difficult cases coming forward.
And we noticed that there obviously with administrative instructions that came out and they've just been renewed. And essentially they say that if you're coming from a non-US, outside the US, you need to have your work permit or your work permit approval letter in hand before you can come in. And whereas if you're coming from the United States, you may just show up and apply at the border. So there's a bit of a differential treatment there. And I think it's because at the time the Order in Council in particular was drafted, there was a sense that our economies were so linked with the United States that we want to have a little more flexibility there. But now there's a difference. If you're a UK national, you can apply at the port of entry. If you're a UK national coming from the UK, then you have to first apply for your work permit or approval letter in advance. So yet we know some of these folks are really critical to our economy. So I guess the question from our members is, when are we going to once again have people coming in from abroad being able to apply right at the port of entry if they're visa exempt, if they don't need a visa to come into Canada? They used to be able to, and like people from the US are able to now.
Well, first, again, I'll acknowledge that there are concerns about those temporary foreign workers who are not able to apply for and receive their work permits at the border upon arrival. There are good security reasons for that. I think we can all appreciate that if we're having people show up for work at the border without the usual and conventional approvals in place, but for one reason or other, let's say a job offer fell through, that it may lead to other problems around the terms and conditions of their being able to remain and stay in Canada. And we are ensuring that our border officers are focused on that security principle. I mean, again, just to underline, this is really about keeping our people safe and stopping the spread of COVID-19 as much as possible. At least for now, it's not logistically feasible to allow work permits to be processed at the point of entry because of the reasons I've just stated. And we also want to ensure that anyone who travels to Canada right now has a good reason for doing so. That's not to say that temporary foreign workers don't. And what I mentioned earlier is very true, in that we created this broad category of exemption because we recognize that the TFW program is often about contributing significantly to the economy. And otherwise, we will continue to try to administer this program with as much sound judgment as we possibly can.
Okay, fair enough. The other question that we received was around reuniting. So, and this is another quirk, I think, of when the orders were drafted. So I think when the Order in Council was drafted with respect to people coming from outside of the United States, I think the idea was you had some foreign nationals, and we're talking about families of foreign nationals here. So you had a foreign national who was in Canada, and then you had a foreign national who was abroad, and they were caught because flights were being canceled, countries were shutting down. And so there was a provision in the Order in Council that said that, you know, you can come and join your foreign national partner if, you know, you need to. And so that language has persisted in the order today. And so what that means is, if you need to bring in some of the critical workers that we talked about, like for instance a physician or someone who's a researcher, someone who's needed for critical infrastructure. What unfortunately it means right now is that you would have to first have the foreign national come and leave their family behind. And then once it's here, then and only then could they apply for their family to join them. So I guess it's just more of a suggestion that as the cabinet is looking at revising the orders of council, if maybe that could be something that could be considered, because, you know, if someone's coming in to really help Canada, and as you say, we're prioritizing the critical folks right now, it would be nice if maybe the whole family could also come. You know, the dependents could come at the same time. So I just offer that as a suggestion, to something to take away. And I'll get to yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say very briefly, I'm really glad that you raised the question on behalf of the CBA, and I'm certainly willing to look at the question further. But as I said before, we're always reevaluating our policies to make sure that they are achieving the ultimate goal, which is to protect the health and safety of Canadians, while at the same time ensuring that immigration is working and functioning properly. In the interim, we're going to make sure that we are adhering to that principle around really reducing non-essential travel, particularly across our international borders. And I think if we take a look at the news abroad, the one thing that has really emerged very recently is that we are far from being over COVID-19. There are countries who have seen themselves come down on the other end of the curve, but then see subsequent second waves and new surges come. We want to really reduce that probability as much as possible. And so for the time being, the travel restrictions around non-essential travel will remain in place.
Okay, and just coming to the last question. So, you know, as I said at the outset, you know, this program for international students has been great in terms of allowing them to complete up to 50% of their coursework online without jeopardizing the coveted postgraduate open work permit, which then allows them potentially to transition to permanent residence. So we know that they're protected for the May-June cohort. I mean, the big cohort is usually September. Of course, everything's so dynamic with respect to the virus. But I'm wondering about that cohort. And I'm also wondering how we are going to ensure there still is a pathway to permanent residence for so many of these international students, which has become, I understand, a $1 billion industry, which is $6 billion relating to international student fees alone. So how are we going to safeguard that, and how are we going to build a room, so that they can become residents, but also not forget about the amazing federal, skilled worker program folks who are foreigners who really have no connection to Canada, but some of them graduate from phenomenal Ivy League schools. Some of them have wonderful education, language ability, work experience, and we don't want to forget about them either. And so far, the draws have focused mostly on those who are in the Canada Experience class or provincial nominee program. So I guess the question broadly is, how do we ensure that the international students continue to have a pathway to permanent residence?
It's a great point, and it's actually an uplifting and optimistic question on which to conclude our discussion today, because as you prefaced in your question, there is so much positive that is derived from the international student program, and not just economically, where the numbers really are quite staggering, as you pointed out, $21.6 billion every year into the economy, not only to the post-secondary sector, but to so many other services and goods that are also profiting from having additional international students come to the campuses. And this is not just a big city. This is not just a program that benefits big cities. There are many smaller and medium-sized towns from coast to coast to coast that really, really rely on the ongoing success of the ISP. So just a few things. One, we have been really, really grateful for the feedback that we're getting from CBA and from other stakeholders in the immigration sector around how we can modify the terms of the international students program to respond to COVID-19. So the online exemptions is a key part of that overall effort. And I'm very happy to say that we have appropriately created some additional flexibility for those who are here and signed up for the spring semester to take fully 100% of their courses online, and for those who are abroad who have a visa but can't get here because it's hard to find an international flight these days, they can take up to 50% of their courses online for the spring semester. And we are engaged with leaders from universities and colleges across Canada to see what we're going to do about the fall. And all I will say about that is stay tuned. But in addition, we're also creating some flexibility around the work permits that attach to the international students program. We have relaxed some of the usual limits around the number of hours that international students who are taking a degree in an essential services, again here prioritizing to the health sector and the food sector, where we're really trying to encourage those who, again, are here taking a medical degree or a nursing degree or taking a diploma in personal support care. I mean, think, for example, of the many challenges that we're seeing in long-term retirement homes right now and the pressure that is on the front line. What we're trying to do here is wrap these modifications so that we can take an all-hands-on-deck approach. And my sincere hope is that international students will avail themselves of these opportunities, not only acquire the skills and experience that brought them here in the first place, but help Canada respond to COVID-19 and do so in a way that provides compassion and treatment and support to those who are suffering from COVID-19, and position us for a successful rebound. And this is just a great way for me, I think, to tie together all of the various subjects that you have touched on over the course of the last hour. And I know that the CBA cares a lot about, and that is, how are we going to continue to leverage immigration for not only for our short-term response to COVID-19, but our long-term economic success and prosperity, and by remaining true to who we are. And each and every one of these areas, the CBA has contributed some really good, concrete, practical suggestions, hopefully many of which you are seeing reflected in our policies and our plans. And I hope that we can continue this conversation, because I know personally I'm benefiting from it. I think our government is benefiting from it. And I think more broadly, Canadians are as well. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to shed a little bit of light on what we've been up to in this very tumultuous 2020. but I'm still a confident guy, an optimistic guy. Most mornings I wake up with a smile on my face, and we'll carry on. And I hope you will all remain in good health as well.
Well, and thank you for that. I mean, I have to say, you know, again, it's another innovation of the department that you've allowed, you know, students who can't work full time to be able to work full time when it comes to COVID-19 and health areas. That's another great innovation. And you know, you've handled, and we do, by the way, have another idea that we're going to present to you and your department with respect to the caregiver program, to see if we can get those folks helping out with our facilities as a way to also transition to PR and get them going sooner. So we'll be in touch with you on that. But I just want to thank you for taking such a wide-ranging group of questions and tackling them very admirably. And I also want to put in a plug for our national conference. Minister, you've kindly agreed to attend. And you know, we've touched on COVID-19 related issues here. The conference will dive much deeper into this and also other general immigration issues. Not only will Minister Mendicino be at attending you know, online for our conference, but also Minister Blair's office has confirmed that he's definitely penciled. So that will be, it's very unusual to have two of these ministers and these portfolios that directly relate to our practice attending at the same time, and it's my honor to be leading that panel. And I just want to thank you for attending, agreeing to attend our conference. I want to thank you for your participation today. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.
Not at all, Ravi. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you and the CBA in person. We hope in the not too distant future. And I'm about to go off and get ready for virtual question period. So excited about that. But thanks again.
Okay, thank you.